I would like to see the Iranian regime be relegated to the dustbin of history. Why? Because it is an evil, oppressive, violence-loving death cult that is motivated by the most extreme ideology. The hostages are not forgotten, the families are not forgotten, the fallen are not forgotten, and Israel continues without respite and without stopping in its quest to return all of the Israeli hostages back.
Jonathan, great to have you back with us. Multiple bunker-busting bombs, 30 Tomahawk missiles targeting 3 critical sites, Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordo. What do we know about this dramatic strike?
Well, we know that we'll have to wait for a few hours until we get final battle damage assessment of exactly how effective those strikes were. Obviously, 2 locations are easier, but Fordo is more challenging to understand exactly how effective these unprecedented American strikes were. I think in terms of radiation, the Atomic Agency and the Iranians have already said that there's no risk of radiation, so that's a good thing because the enriched radioactive material was moved out of these locations beforehand. And what this really means now is that I think the ball is back in the Iranian court, and now they will have to make a decision how to proceed from here. I think the chances and the stakes are now higher for the Iranian regime. Now it's not only about their nuclear weapons program, but this could go way beyond that scope. And it all depends on how the Iranians will respond to Israeli actions and, of course, the very important American actions. If they choose to escalate, they are extremely vulnerable, and I think it would be a grave mistake that they will regret in the future. And if they choose not to escalate, then maybe they could come to an agreement through diplomatic channels and get away with still existing without the rest of Iran coming under direct Israeli or joint Israeli and US attacks.
And Iran invested $500 billion over 40 years in its nuclear program, while the country's in poverty, hyper high inflation, currency collapse, widespread poverty. It's prioritized nukes over its people, hasn't it? And now that's all in ruins.
Not only that, Iran has also spent billions and billions, if not trillions, on funding terror organizations around the Middle East. And that project is now also past its most glorious days, should we say conservatively. And yes, the Iranian people has been robbed by the Iranian regime, and their present and their future has really been affected by it. Now, what the Iranian regime has done is to bet that by achieving nuclear weapons, they would be able to safeguard themselves from any external threat and any external influence on it. That bet has now failed. That bluff has been called, and those actions have been seen through by Israel and by the US. And now the Iranians will have to make a really difficult choice. A choice that basically is between their honor or their respect or the future of the regime. If they're clever enough and they're cool-headed enough, the smart thing to do is to de-escalate and to agree to no future attempts of enrichment in Iran and to let go of the pipe dream of ever having nuclear weapons. If they're smart, that's what they will do, and I think they'll find a very positive partner in President Trump. He would want to do that deal, and the Iranians would be able to get away with the regime intact. If they're not smart, if they let their emotions lead the way, and if they will get bundled up with this is our credibility and we've spent so much money and time and resources and this is national pride, then this could get much, much worse for them because, again, worth to mention, Iran is exposed. Iran has no air defenses, and all of their critical national infrastructure is there for the taking if Israel or the US should decide to do so for whatever reason. And I think the Iranians have to be extremely careful, calm and cool-headed, and understand their priorities and understand in what a sensitive military situation they're in. They're not in the driving seat. They are not in a position to be dictating terms to anybody, not to Israel and not to the US and not even to the Europeans. And any mistakes that they'll do could be very, very difficult for the future of that regime.
And those mistakes could look like a lot of different things, couldn't they? We've already seen ballistic missiles fired towards Israel. Some penetrated, some landed, with devastation that those cause. So what comes next? Should they choose the wrong path? And what could potentially be options that they may take?
Well, obviously, Iran still has military capabilities. They could try to lash out at American assets in the region, in the Middle East. There's lots of American bases and naval assets deployed. They could try to do that. They could try to hit American targets elsewhere, which would be more difficult. They could, of course, try to use proxies, terrorist organizations, or thugs, organized crime, to hit Israeli, Jewish, or American targets in Europe or in Asia. We know that this is a modus operandi that the Iranians have tried to use many times. Just yesterday, a man that is a member of the Revolutionary Guard was apprehended in Cyprus. He was planning an attack on Israeli targets, but through advanced intel and cooperation between different security services, he was apprehended. And we know that they have plans to do that in other areas, specifically in Europe and Asia. So the worst mistake that I think the Iranians could do now would be to attack American troops, or to try to limit the flow of oil and maritime traffic through the Straits of Hormuz. That would be really challenging. I think it would open up a Pandora's box of attacks on Iran, which I'm not entirely sure that they comprehend.
Let's remind our viewers why these strikes, both by Israel and the United States, are happening now at this time, because naysayers in the West, as I mentioned in my monologue, are charged that this is like Iraq. They say there was no real threat, but this isn't Iraq, is it?
No, I mean, that's, I think, a very faulty and quite lazy comparison. This is very different. This is Israel dealing with an existential threat. And like the German chancellor said, Israel doing the dirty work for the world. And if we listen to the statements made by France, by the EU, by the UK, by Germany, and by the US, there's quite rare, unprecedented support of Israel. The first paragraph of each and every of those statements clearly says Iran must not be able to achieve nuclear weapons. And what Israel has done is to take preemptive action against Iran and preventing Iran from achieving that. And of course, now the US has delivered the final and decisive blow. That is the context of what's happening. This is not wanton Israeli aggression. This is not American imperialism. This is nothing of the kind. This is a rogue, unstable, fundamental, and extremist regime, the Iranian regime, that has been trying desperately and really harnessing many of the talents and most of the resources of their country in a quest to achieve nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction. And frankly, I think we've been through about 20 years of international negotiations, maybe even more than that. And the issue of Iranian nuclear weapons has been really debated and negotiated diplomatically for very, very long, almost 25 years. Iran has had so many off-ramps, so many warnings, so many opportunities to de-escalate and to make the right choice. I think they had very flexible and liberal partners in the previous American administrations that really gave them extremely lenient and in my mind, dangerous deals that could have allowed them to have a peaceful, benign nuclear program. But that isn't what Iran wanted. Iran wanted to be able to develop weapons, and they were sprinting, rushing in order to develop these weapons. That's why Israel struck. Israel also struck because President Trump gave the Iranians 60 days to negotiate. They failed to reach an agreement. They failed to accept any American offers. And on the 61st day, on the 13th of June, Israel commenced attacks against Iran's nuclear weapons program. So Of course, naysayers, maybe they will be listening to the statements of the Iranian foreign minister and all of the other lies that are coming out of Iran. It doesn't change reality. The Iranian regime is a dangerous, unstable, fundamentalist regime that shouldn't exist to begin with, and it definitely shouldn't have its hands on weapons of mass destruction. And now Israel has taken the first step. The US has taken a second and probably crucial step. And if the Iranians are smart, they leave it at that. If they're not smart, they escalate, and then we can find ourselves in a whole different and much more dangerous dynamic in the region.
Now, the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, responded to the strikes immediately, saying he is, quote, gravely concerned about the use of force by the United States against Iran. That seems like a strange way to say thank you, America, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost echoing in a few less words the statement of the Iranian foreign minister. So it seems that those two are well coordinated. They're reading from the same message page. And I think that is, of course, extremely, extremely sad. One of the responses that I read on X to his statement was that, if this was World War II, judging by that response, there wouldn't have been a doubt who he would have sided with in World War II. And it's not with the good guys. I think it's another example of how morally corrupt and dysfunctional the UN has become. It's being exposed time and time again. I say that with great regret and frustration, because I think that's an organization that is desperately needed in a world where there is lots of food insecurity, climate challenges, many and wars and instability, and of course non-democratic regimes that are oppressing people. But it doesn't seem as if the UN is focused on doing that, and it seems as if it's working for autocrats, working for tyrants of the world, whether it's China or Russia or in this case Iran. Very regrettable, sadly not a surprise to read that kind of statement. And if anything, it proves just how far from its charter and its core mission the UN has allowed itself to slip.
I should say there is much support from other quarters. Indeed, Elisha Wiesel, the son of Holocaust survivor, Nobel Prize winner, and human rights activist Elie Wiesel, posted a thank you to the president for honoring his promise to protect the Jewish people from the enemies who sought to annihilate us. It's been a week, just over a week, since Israel began the campaign and since we last spoke. The day after the president's deadline for negotiations ran out, as you mentioned. Take us through some of the military successes so far.
Yeah, so if I detach myself, from my own eyes as someone who looks at things from an Israeli perspective, if I just look at Iran and Israel and take stock of the military situation, I would say that militarily speaking, it is a situation where Israel enjoys almost all of the advantages. Israel, through really prime intel and Air Force capabilities, has been able to achieve the following things. One, to take out the vast majority of the Iranian military leadership in the opening salvo of the war, but then to continue to hunt the successors and the successors of the successors in some positions, like head of intel for the Revolutionary Guard. It is now the third general that has been eliminated, and in a few other positions as well. That's one important thing. Two, nuclear scientists. This is perhaps the most important part because, and I actually agree with the Iranians here, knowledge is a difficult thing to bomb. But you can take out the repository of such knowledge in the form of nuclear scientists and weapons scientists and advanced metals scientists. And they were taken out. 10 of them have been taken out by Israel in the opening salvo. And that sets the Iranian weapons program back many, many years. That is something, those 10 scientists together, decades or even more than that, centuries of knowledge, experience, and know-how that the Iranian regime now no longer has. So that's very important. Third achievement is in terms of the nuclear facilities. I don't think that there's a single component left now after the American strikes. I do not believe that there's a single component left of the Iranian nuclear program that has been left unattacked. Not everything has been destroyed yet, and there is still work to do. But I would say that the vast majority of targets have been struck, and now it's a question of battle damage assessment, and if necessary, to strike again and again in order to really set back the Iranian weapons program. 4 is Israel's ability to take out Iranian air defenses. And what that has done, and again, this is very much contrary to conventional wisdom and the assessments of many Israel critics before that. They said Israel wouldn't be able to strike in Iran, and that the mighty air defenses of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard would shoot down our F-35s and our F-15s flying in Iranian skies. That, thankfully, has not happened. And today, Israel has total freedom of movement and aerial superiority in Iranian skies. No small achievement, and that is very important when we look ahead as to where things are going and where this conflict is leading. And last but not least, Israel is successfully hunting and taking out Iran's missile launchers. More than 55%, according to the IDF, more than 55% of Iran's of their ballistic missile launches have been taken out. And every time a missile is fired, the location is marked on a map, and the IDF starts hunting the launcher, and of course does so preemptively before they try to fire as well. That, by the way, is very important, because that appears to be the only way that Iran can leverage influence and attack Israel currently. Everything else hasn't been working, not their proxies, not ground forces, not global terrorism, but ballistic missiles. And by the way, the drones have not been working either. Israel has been able to intercept 99% of all incoming drones, and we're talking about a big number. More than 1,000 drones have been dispatched from Iran towards Israel. Most of them have been intercepted out of Israeli airspace through cooperation with the US and other countries. And though there were a few that penetrated Israeli airspace, they were blown out of the sky. One impacted yesterday in the northern city of Beit She'an, luckily not leading to any casualties, but substantial damage to a building. So all in all, I would say that the Iranians are left with less and less military options on the table, which is a very refreshing and different position for them to be in. And Israel has complete freedom of movement and lots of tools at their disposal. And now it's really only about decisions. Will the Iranians escalate? If they do, Israel has a very large target bank of national infrastructure, of oil and gas infrastructure and regime locations and many other things that Israel could strike if the Iranians decide to continue and escalate this situation.
Let's turn to Gaza for a moment. Our mutual friend and our guest on last week's show, Colonel Richard Kemp, visited Gaza this week and saw for himself how well the new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is operating. Take a look.
Richard Kemp at one of the GHF food distribution centres inside Gaza. As you can see behind me, there are a large number, around about 20,000 Gazans have come here to collect aid delivered into Gaza by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And there's about 20 trucks worth of food behind me. Most of the people are very happy, I think, to be getting this aid compared to what existed before the GHF started operations, which in many cases was very little or none. So I think the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, to me, seems to do an extraordinary job here in Gaza. And I hope that some of the international aid and humanitarian organisations that have rejected the GHF's work will rethink this. This is a really important mission that the GHF is carrying out in the interest of the welfare and feeding of the people of Gaza.
So they're giving out more than 33.5 million meals in 3 weeks. That's good news for Gaza, but bad news for Hamas, isn't it?
Yes, it's great for hungry Gazans that have been oppressed by Hamas, but it's not good for Hamas, and all of their friends around the world are not happy. We see condemnations left and right and center from all kinds of organizations, some that claim to be humanitarian organizations, and then outright supporters of Hamas and Hamas's allies. I think it is perhaps really the peak of cynicism. Anybody who alleges that he or she cares about the plight of the situation of Palestinians, he and she should, of course, be very supportive of this endeavor that Israel is now finally doing, facilitating food to Palestinians without Hamas being able to intercept it and control it. And it really just is this very clear litmus test with who really cares about Palestinians and who is in it for other reasons. And those who are currently criticizing the Israeli efforts, those who are trying to delegitimize it, those who are trying to make it to fail, are the same people that are probably not guided by the best interest and well-being of Palestinians, but by other things, by Hamas staying in power, by continuing difficulties for Israel, perhaps future Palestinian statehood, or any other issue, any other nefarious goal that can be leveraged. And I think it's very telling. But the bottom line and the reality on the ground is irrefutable. What Israel is doing, together with the Gaza Humanitarian Fund and its other partners, is a system that works. It provides food to Palestinians, and it doesn't allow Hamas to meddle with it and to use food as leverage and basically to extort the Palestinian population by using international humanitarian aid. My assessment is that this will continue, and that Israel will continue to undermine and loosen Hamas's grip on the population, and that eventually the population in Gaza will be strong enough and brave enough to really resist Hamas. That, together with military pressure, continuous, relentless Israeli military pressure on Hamas, and now the fact that their Iranian masters have found themselves in quite a military and diplomatic predicament, maybe that will be enough to finally get Hamas leadership to understand the futility of what they're doing and get them to surrender, hand over hostages, and start the much needed work of thinking about the day after in Gaza and starting to rebuild it to the benefit of civilians living there, not for the Hamas terrorists that have been controlling it and that have brought destruction on Gaza.
And we should mention that the IDF today rescued the bodies of 3 hostages, Ofra Kedar, Jonathan Samarano, and Shai Levinson. That's 625 days after being taken into captivity on October the 7th. That's an important and a complex operation, isn't it?
Yeah, it goes to show that the Israeli defense establishment, ISA, Shabak, IDF, and everybody else, Intel, they continue tirelessly to look for clues, to generate intel, and then once enough intel is collected, to send Israeli special forces to those locations where we believe that bodies of hostages are held, in order to extract them and to bring them home to the families and at least offer a small amount of solace and closure for the families so that they can at least bury their loved ones. The 3 of these Israeli civilians, one was a soldier, but he wasn't in military service when, sorry, I'll strike that. These 3 Israelis, one of them soldier, a tank commander, and a 71-year-old woman who was murdered out on her morning walk. Again, they were murdered on the 7th of October, and their bodies were taken by Hamas. And the only reason Hamas held on to the bodies was in order to extract a price from Israel. So extremely cruel, extremely tormenting for the families. But I think it's positive that at least they're being brought back home. And it goes to show that the hostages are not forgotten, the families are not forgotten, the fallen are not forgotten. And Israel continues without respite and without stopping in its quest to return all of the Israeli hostages back. Hopefully, we'll be able to get the live ones back. They are, of course, the most important one and the most urgent one. And I think, if global powers like France, the UK, and Germany can show sense and they can support Israel against one menace, the Iranian regime, I think they should show the same kind of moral compass and adjust course and support Israel in what it's doing against Hamas. Hamas and the Iranian regime are part of the same axis. They're part of the same effort to destroy the state of Israel. One nation was seeking nuclear and weapons of mass destruction, and one terrorist organization only had the ability to abduct and to kill Israelis living close to Gaza. But they are part of the same mindset, and they should be fought with the same tenacity. And I think the free world should stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel and support Israel in its fight against Hamas.
Absolutely. 50 hostages still in Gaza, 20 presumed to be alive. In a moment, I'll give our next guest, Dr. Ahmed, a chance to tell us her view on what a new Middle East could look like. But in your view, should the regime fall, and now that the nuclear ambitions of the regime are being dealt such a blow, what might the future hold?
Well, I'm thrilled that you're bringing on Dr. Kanta Ahmed, a renowned Middle East expert. She's all over international media, and I'm sure will share very interesting things about her perspective, her unique perspective as a Muslim woman who's been following events in this area for a long time. I would say, I'm cautiously optimistic that the right-sizing or downsizing of the Iranian regime in terms of its nuclear ambitions, in terms of its capacity to continue to fund terrorism that destabilizes the region, and the fact that most of its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Islamic Jihad, have been weakened. Those are, of course, good things for the region. They're good for Israel, they're good for Lebanon, for Gaza, for Palestinians, and for Jordan. However, there is a chance that things will escalate further, and perhaps we will see regime change in Iran. Now here, I would like to see the Iranian regime be relegated to the dustbin of history. Why? Because it is an evil, oppressive, violence-loving death cult that is motivated by the most extreme ideology, and I think they have no place, not in the Middle East, and not continuing to oppress the Iranian people. And I'm sure that millions of Iranians would be extremely happy if that regime were to be overthrown and they would be able to chart their own future. However, I'm a little bit cautious here, because we don't know how that will pan out. And we know that revolutions many times are messy. And my basic principle is that I think this is something that is up to the Iranian people and only the Iranian people. I think we've seen a lot of failed nation building and regime changes in the past in the Middle East. And I think Iran, the Iranian people, is a very large, smart, educated, and it has a very long and illustrious history. And the important thing here is that the Iranians will be able to organize and chart their own way towards a better and more prosperous future. What I think we have to be mindful of is that it's not going to be an easy first transition process and period. It might get bumpy, it might get bloody, but at the end of it, I hope that the Iranian people will have a better future. And if that happens, of course, the region will be more stable and Israel will be better off. And I think there will be lots of positive opportunities for the region, for the Iranian people, for Sunni Arabs in the region, and of course for Israel. The Iranian regime is extremely evil. It does not have the needs of the Iranian people as its first or second priority. It's oppressive, it's brutal, it's horrible against minorities, and it has no right to continue to exist and oppress with their aggressive goals. And I hope that we'll see change in the future. I'll, curb my enthusiasm and optimism. I think there's still some way to go because we're talking about a very brutal regime. But at the end of the day, good things, I think, will come. And I hope that we will see peace through strength that has been displayed by Israel and by the US. And I hope that will give strength to the Iranian people, strength to peace-loving and progress-loving people in the region, and hopefully we'll see good things.
We certainly hope so. Well, Jonathan, as a certain tweet stated, Thank you for your attention to this matter. We appreciate your insight as always, my friends. Stay safe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Shalom.